This is Demiworld. Oh my god! So, do you still want to call this episode Bitches Be Crazy?
I mean, I feel like you're not sold on that idea.
I'm fine. That's what I called it on my blog post that I'm working on, but I put an exclamation point instead of an I so that the SEO wouldn't get mad and not find it.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm like swearing, but
Yeah.
that's totally fine.
That is what I would like to call it. I mean,
Okay, my lady is she's a little unstable. I'm gonna give her that. She's not as crazy as some could be, but she definitely had her issues.
I'm
Obviously,
excited.
She murdered somebody. So.
okay, I don't know who this is. I'm like, ooh, the suspense is killing me.
Should we just jump in?
Tell me, yeah. Tell me.
All
who
right.
it is.
Oh yeah. So first of all, this is Demiworld. I'm Cindy,
I'm Kelly.
and today we're talking about crazy ladies, crazy bitches.
Bitches be crazy.
Bitches be crazy. And you know what? I gotta say, I have been a crazy ex. I have been driven crazy by the opposite sex before.
Okay, I'm glad you used that word driven, because here's the way that I approach this episode of Bitches Be Crazy is that these bitches are crazy on their own and they weren't, because I think being driven to craziness is different than being independently crazy on your own.
It is. My woman is definitely, she was set up to be in abusive relationships from the get-go because of her upbringing. But at any point, she could have walked away, but she did not.
Okay.
And she premeditated the murder, so that's on
Right.
her.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, there are extenuating circumstances regarding the whole thing, and there's a lot of classism and sexism that goes along with it. But she fucking shot somebody in cold blood, so she's still a crazy bitch. But
All right. Well, let's judge. Tell me
Yes.
what's going on, and then we'll judge.
Okay.
We'll judge this person and see.
okay, so let's go for this. Let's see. Let's see if she deserved what she got. So Ruth Ellis was the last woman to be executed in the United Kingdom for murder, and that was in 1955. So Ruth shot her wealthy boyfriend, David Blakely, at point blank range in public, premeditated. Like, she waited for him. She went to where he was with a gun to shoot him.
How old was she when she did this?
She was 27 years old.
How old was he? Do we know?
He was 25, I believe.
So like the same age as.
Yeah, so she's a little bit
basically.
older than him, but not by much. I mean, it was a big deal in the 50s. Oh my God, she's 3 years his senior. She's a cougar. But
Right.
really, I mean, come on.
Yes, that is exactly how they spoke in the 1950s.
That's
as
exactly how they spoke.
They talk like that because it was the way that it mostly carried through radio.
The radio. Well,
frequencies.
you had to like play to the back row, you know? Like you had to really live it up to do that.
Yeah, the way that like whatever certain frequencies that electronic communication was on at that time, like you had to talk weird, or sometimes you just couldn't. That's
Is
why.
that what it
That's why they
was?
talk like that, because people don't really talk like that, but that's how they had to speak for the speech to actually be intelligible on the other end.
Oh, you know, that probably like there's that whole like pan ethnic accent that newscasters and actors have. So it's kind of like the easiest to understand Scottish accent, the easiest to understand Spanish accent, and then the US, you know, whatever regional accent you have, it's like that how clear is your diction? How well do you speak? Kind
Well,
of a
and
thing.
from someone who works remotely, and I get all sorts of different audio all the time, there are certain accents that come through way better than others, where I
Sure.
know that it has to do with the technology and the frequencies of like the airwaves. if I was in the room, I could hear it because I know that people in the room are hearing it and probably aren't getting why I'm not hearing it. But it's like whatever frequency accent is coming through at is not working. Anyway, sorry, side note.
No. That was very informative. I hadn't actually thought of that, like, that acting. I am an actor, kind of a thing being something that was more easily discerned via certain media. Yeah. I just thought that was like what they did at the time.
Yeah, but it was necessity. Yeah, that makes sense. That's what we don't know. That's what we don't really realize. Yeah, I know. Isn't it neato burrito fact?
This has been Neato Burrito Corner. Join us here again later. Okay, so Ruth, there was only two sources that I could find that really even talked about Ruth's background, which does paint her in a more sympathetic light as opposed to what the media did for her at the time. And they had like the Daily Mail reported 6 revolver shots shattered the Easter Sunday calm of Hampstead, and a beautiful platinum blonde stood with her back to the wall, in her hand a revolver. It's just like that was what they were reporting at the time. It's just kind of like, oh, this platinum blonde shoots this man, like. And then she was also like this model shoots boyfriend, and blonde shoots rich guy. You know what I mean? It's just like he was rich, she was not. No, don't make any bones about it. This is an inevitability of her class and gender. This is what poor women do to rich men, kind of a thing. So Murder Maps and Murderpedia were the only two sources I found that even talked about Ruth's background. So Ruth was born in October 1926 in the Welsh seaside town of Rhyl, which was working class. She was born Ruth Hornsby. Her mom was a Belgian refugee who fled the German occupation during World War I, and her father played in orchestras on Atlantic cruises, so it meant he was gone a lot of the time. They had a very traditional and strict Catholic household, and everything went pretty according to plan for the first 2 years of Ruth's life until her dad's brother died suddenly in an automobile accident, and then her baby brother died a year later. To kind of numb his pain, her father begins drinking really heavily, which makes him very violent, and he begins beating the family regularly. So it's not a real great environment to be growing up in. Because of his drinking, he can't keep a job. So they move around a lot. He'll get a job for a little while, lose it, they move, this sort of thing. And then in 1940, he moves them to London during the Blitz. Now, the Blitz is the systematic bombing by the Nazis of English towns, especially London, because it was populated and it was the capital. So he literally moves his family to a war zone. At this time, Ruth is 14. And like many London youth during the war, she lives in the moment. Everybody did. There was this very large, teeming nightclub life, and she became involved in that, and she dropped out of school at 14 and started waitressing so she'd have money to go out and do things, buy things, and party, basically. In 1943, she meets a French-Canadian soldier named Claire Andrea McCullum. We're going to call him Andy. And she gets pregnant, which is, what you do when you're 17 years old and you're in your first, loving relationship. You get pregnant. He says, I'll marry you. She says, fantastic. She's super excited. They start planning for the wedding and the baby. And then 9 months after the baby's born, before they get married, she discovers that not only is Andy married back in Canada, he's got 3 kids. So he goes back to Canada with his wife and children, sends money for about a year, but then that stops. So then Ruth now has to find jobs to support her family. She moves back in with her family, starts scraping by, doing, the regular secretarial waitressy stuff. And then she answers an ad in the paper for modeling at a place called the Camera Club. It's not like JCPenney's modeling. It's not Vogue modeling. It's nudes. And she makes a lot of money doing it. It's post-war at this point. Rations are still being handed out. If you're single, there were a lot of women who lost, air quotes, husbands during the war because they had a lot of babies out of wedlock because husbands were gone. You know, people didn't know if they were going to live in the morning. They didn't know when they were going to get bombed next. So people were just having sex everywhere, and there wasn't birth control yet. So if you didn't have a husband or a dead husband somewhere, it was really hard to find respectable work. And it didn't pay well either. But this kind of stuff did. So while she's at the camera club, she meets a guy named Morris Connolly, who is a nightclub owner, and he poses as a very respectable businessman when actually he's one of the biggest vice bosses in London. And he invites Ruth to be a hostess at one of his nightclubs, and she takes the job, and she has 3 requirements for the job. Look good, entertain guests, and have sex with whomever Connolly tells her to have sex with.
Oh, geez. Only those 3 requirements?
Only
those
all? 3 requirements. Himself
geez,
included.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Yeah, himself included. So basically he's a pimp, right? He's a pimp with a nightclub. So basically he has a brothel posing as a nightclub. And these nightclubs were like that. So the pubs would close really early in London, and there would be no place for people to go party. So then they would switch over to the nightclubs, which were open all night, and there was lots of drinking and lots of wealthy men throwing around a lot of money, and the more sex they could get, the more money they threw around. So Ruth does this until 1953, when she meets George Ellis, who is much older than she is. He's an accountant. He is divorced. He has a couple of kids from his previous marriage. And he marries Ruth, and she's like, finally, I'm going to have a respectable, name. I'm going to be somebody other than just this person working in a bar, basically.
Oh, it's like the Anna Nicole Smith dream, You get rescued out of a strip club by a wealthy older man.
They get married, and they have a daughter, and George Ellis refuses to say that the baby is his. He's convinced that Ruth has been cheating on him and begins to beat her regularly. She tries to leave a couple of times, doesn't quite get out of there. She tries to make it work until finally the beatings become so bad that she just divorces him. And she goes back to work for Morris Connolly in one of his clubs called the Little Club. But this time she is the manager, not a hostess. And she is the youngest manager in London. So she's really making a name for herself. She doesn't have to sleep with people anymore. She's actually managing the club. She's basically the madam now. So she's in charge of the other ladies, but she has more control. She's making a lot of money. A flat comes with the job, so her and her son can live there. The baby with George Ellis is just too young for any of this to be really left alone, not school age, so that baby is living with her parents. While she's managing this club, this very handsome, very wealthy, from a good family guy named David Blakely walks through the door, and the two of them are instantly drawn to each other. And they start a very passionate, very jealous, very alcohol-fueled relationship. And it wasn't very long before, like maybe 2 weeks into the relationship, he moves in with her. And then they begin cheating on each other fairly quickly. He was young. He liked to chase skirts. And she was always getting men fawning over her in the clubs. Some of them were really wealthy. Some of them were celebrities. So, you get kind of swept up. So they're both cheating on each other. Right before she meets David Blakely, she meets another guy named Desmond Cousins. And Desmond Cousins is a well-off guy who is a very, astute businessman. He kind of goes around in the same sort of circles that David Blakely does in the racing circuit. But he really loves Ruth and he wants to marry her, but she just kind of pushes him off, and they have a kind of on-again, off-again sexual relationship. But then she meets Blakely and she's like, I can't marry you. I really love this guy over here. And it doesn't take long before the relationship between David Blakely and Ruth gets really violent, and he begins beating the ever-loving shit out of her on a regular basis. She gets hospitalized a few times for it. The beatings get worse when he starts throwing all of his money that he gets from his family, his allowance, into racing, so he has nothing left over. So then Ruth is supporting them, so he beats her more. as a result of that. At one point, she gets pregnant, and he asks her to marry him. She says yes, and then they get into a big fight later on, and he punches her so hard in the stomach that she loses the baby, is hospitalized again. And these fights begin to happen in the little club while she's working. So any man that came up and spoke with her, Blakely would get in their face and start yelling at them. So they had these huge fights, and profits started to drop by about half. So Connolly fires her, and when he fires her, she also loses her house. So she moves in, her and her son move in with Desmond Cousins. And he starts paying for lessons for her, like modeling lessons and French lessons, and trying to get her into another line of work. But she's always covered in bruises from Blakely's beatings, so she can't really model. And then she has the miscarriage, so she's really sick, so she can't continue that. And then she starts taking French lessons to try to impress Blakely and his friends, but that doesn't really do anything either. It doesn't help. It just makes, they mock her more openly in front of, in front of her, basically. They mock this working class girl from Wales, like, you can't compete with us. We have the breeding, you're nobody. So why are you even trying, kind of a thing.
Can't sit with us.
You can't sit with us. We're the cool kids. Fuck off. So she starts hanging out with Desmond Cousins more, who really wants to get her away from Blakely, and starts like kind of feeding into her neuroses about this. It's a really bad relationship. It's caustic. And she's like, you'd just be better off if you got rid of him, kind of a thing. So David has a couple of friends called the Findletters, and the Findletters can't stand Ruth. They think that she is just this low-class harlot, and their good friend David is being led astray and is becoming violent because of this horrible woman. So they scheme together to get the pair apart for the long Easter weekend. And David is staying with Ruth on Good Friday and says, "Peace, I'm going to go over to the Findletters for a bit. I'll see you later. I'll come back later on tonight." And he doesn't. So Ruth starts to get pissed. She takes her son and goes over to Desmond Cousins' place, where they drink heavily. And she admits in front of her son, who later on writes like a memoir about the whole thing before the poor dear takes his own life in his 30s, because this whole incident ruined his whole childhood and ruined his whole life. He recalls that she tells Desmond Cousins, "I just want to shoot him." And Desmond Cousins replies, "I have a gun. It's old and rusty, but I can show you how to shoot it, and then you can end it. You can just shoot him." So he gets her the gun, and she goes back to her little tiny studio apartment that she's renting with her son, tucks him into bed, and says, "I'll be back later." Takes a taxi to where the Findletters live, where she thinks that David Blakely is. And as she pulls up, she sees David Blakely and another man named Clive Gunnell getting into Blakely's car. The party has run out of supplies, cigarettes and booze, and the two have volunteered to go get more. And she sees them drive off. They're going to a place called the Magdala Club, which supplies beer and cigarettes, basically, and it's like a 4-story drinking establishment. So she pays the taxi and begins walking in the direction that they've driven, thinking that they're probably going to the Magdala Club, and it's about a half-mile walk. And she gets there, and she sees Blakely's car out front, and she waits for him, pacing back and forth on the sidewalk until he emerges, and he's holding a bunch of beer, and he's trying to get his keys out of his pocket when she pulls the gun out and fires twice at him. Both miss. So he freaks out and tries to get away, and she shoots him again, this time hitting him. He falls to the ground, and then she shoots him 2 to 3 times in the back. It depends on who you talk to or whose article you read. And passerbys hear a bunch of clicks where the gun is not firing, and then it finally fires again, and the final bullet hits the sidewalk and ricochets and hits a woman in the thumb who's standing outside the club. So the commotion is heard by an off-duty police officer who's inside the Magdala Club having a pint. And he comes out to hear Ruth tell Clive Gunnell to call the police. And she turns and looks at this off-duty police officer. She has no idea who he is and says, have the police been called? He says, I am the police. She's like, oh, here, and hands him the gun. She's like, I've just shot this man. I need to be arrested. So she doesn't put up any fight. She knows what she's done is wrong. She knows that she'll probably be hanged for it. And the trial doesn't last long, and they actually do it pretty quickly. It's probably just a few weeks after they have the trial. None of David Blakely's abuse to her is brought up. The miscarriage isn't brought up. The hospitalizations isn't brought up. The reason she lost her job isn't brought up. Nothing bad is brought up about David Blakely during the trial.
Well, I don't know if it would have made a difference if it was, to be quite honest.
Some people believe that her sentence would have been reduced to manslaughter instead.
Maybe.
But, you know, it's
Is this in the 60s, you said?
1955.
Okay.
1955.
I mean,
So-
it's pretty antiquated.
Yeah, it's pretty cut and dry, too. I mean, she never says that she didn't do it. And actually,
She actually said she did do it.
Yeah, she never
that
said
she
that
needed to be arrested.
she did. And there's a million witnesses that saw her do it. So, I mean it's not
I don't know. If I had a guess, she wanted to go down and she wanted to take someone with her, you know?
Basically. And I mean, she, during the trial, she's cross-examined by the prosecution. And they basically ask her, like, when you stood over David Blakely and you fired into his back, what was your intention? She's like, I wanted to kill him. And that was it. That was it. There was no other questions they needed to ask. They had their motive. They had premeditation. It was basically cold-blooded murder. And she never wanted to be anything but that. The saddest part is that she wanted to be executed because she wanted to be with Blakely again. That's how twisted her mind was at this point. She just wanted to be with him again. So the only way to do that is to be dead. But since she's raised a good Catholic girl, she's not going to take her own life. So stubbornly, before the execution, she asks to peroxide her hair again because she doesn't want roots. So she bleaches her hair
Priorities,
again.
you know.
Priorities, you know, you gotta look good.
You gotta look good.
So she goes to the gallows, and the gentleman who is her executioner says he would never forget Ruth Ellis. He had put something like 430 people to death, 30 of which were women, but Ruth was the only one that smiled at him. So
yeah,
the public was already on the fence about capital punishment in the UK. They thought it was antiquated. They thought that we're living in a new era now. We have all of this great medical afforded to our citizens. We need to stop putting people to death for murder. And right before Ruth's execution, there had been 3 people who had been executed wrongly. They had not committed the crimes that they had been executed for. In hindsight, people were like, this is fucked up. We can't do this. Like, we're going to find out more people are innocent and have been murdered, basically murdered on the gallows if they're innocent people. So we don't want to have this happen anymore. And they really didn't like seeing women executed. After she's executed, 10 years later, the death penalty is abolished in the UK, and she is the last woman to be executed in the UK. That's the story of Ruth Ellis.
I would say that she's crazy.
Yeah, she's definitely crazy.
Bitch be crazy.
Bitch be crazy. Yeah. I guess you could say that her upbringing with her abusive father set her up to have a bunch of shitty guys, relationship with shitty guys.
No, it definitely sounds like she had a hard life, her whole life, it seems like, but I think at some point it sounds like she snapped.
Well, at some point you're an adult, you know what I mean? You have to either just walk away or like she did, like,
yeah, you can't continue to be like a victim always of circumstance,
No.
If your lifestyle also includes like a lot of hard drinking and unhealthy choices on top of general abuse, I mean, you gotta take responsibility somewhere, or stop making poor choices over and over again.
And she did. She took responsibility, but only after she took somebody's life. But yeah, I would agree. Bitch be crazy. How about your lady?
Okay, so I picked Casey Anthony.
Oh, God. I almost watched the documentary that's online right now about her. I was like, I can't do it.
Have you watched, do you know a lot about her?
I don't. I don't know a lot about it.
Okay, so this case, her trial was in 2011, so it's
Okay.
not too long ago. But her daughter initially went missing in 2008, and so it was big news for kind of by the time her daughter was missing until she went to trial was 3 years, and so I feel like it was just kind of on the news for 3 years. It was a
Yeah,
lot.
it kind of was. Yeah.
And it was one of those cases where the media decided that they're going to take it and run with it because it captured I guess, the public's attention, whatever.
Well, yeah, a
It
little
was
girl
just
went missing. A little white girl went missing.
Yeah, but the case initially for me, it drove me crazy. I hated hearing about it, and I just remember like Nancy Grace called her top mom, and like that stuck, and it was just so obnoxious.
Oh, well, Nancy Grace is obnoxious.
And Nancy Grace is obnoxious. So, so kind of like the bare bones of it is in 2008, like a little 2-year-old girl is reported missing. And it, in cases like this, it always seems to point towards someone in the family, more likely.
An acquaintance or something, yeah.
And in this, the whole case was very unusual. And eventually the decomposing body of the little girl is found and the mom is arrested. And then by the time she goes through trial, it's been a few years. It was kind of a big deal. It was really big news, but I ignored it. And so then by the time 2011 came around, I was in court reporting school. And her trial was going to be televised because it was a really big deal. And I was like nearing the ending of my training. And so I think the teachers were like, you need to practice with the trial that's going to be televised, because for court reporting training, I have to practice 4 hours a day on that little machine, 6 days a week. Like,
oof, that's brutal.
365 days a year. Literally no joke. I mean, I had no time off. And that shit is like, it's all testimony and it's like dry and boring as shit. And so when you get something that's like remotely juicy, you get excited about it. So when I was kind of like, all right, I was open to the Casey Anthony trial because I was just ready for like different material to practice from, and for something that maybe would be interesting. So, but I don't know much about the case. I just know like a little girl goes missing, her body's found, mom's arrested. Now we're at trial because I'm assuming mom is saying she didn't do it. So, and no, I think no one really knew how she had died. I mean, the prosecution had their theory and they had charged her on, I think, murder in the first, which would be premeditated murder.
Right.
And they were seeking actually the death penalty. This was in Florida.
Okay.
And so they, I think, had their theory about how she died, and obviously they were going to present this at trial, but no one knew what the fuck anything the defense was going to do, and everyone just assumed that the mom was maintaining her story initially, which was that some babysitter kidnapped the daughter, That was the initial story when she went missing. The babysitter kidnapped my daughter, and I've been trying to locate her for the past 30 days on my own without involving authorities, because don't worry, I got it under control. I'm about to...
She waited 30 days to report her daughter missing.
Well, she waited 30 days to tell her mother. Okay, we'll get into it in a second.
Okay.
Because this bitches be crazy. Like, she's really... So I'm just going to tell you what we know at this point, or what
this is before the trial, or what, like.
Okay, so when I sit down to watch like the opening statements of the trial, what I know is that like a 2-year-old girl went missing in Florida, and her mom had said that the nanny had kidnapped her, and then like 6 months later, the body is found, and eventually the mom's arrested and charged with murder. And I just assumed that the mother was maintaining her innocence, you know,
Okay.
like I guess whoever kidnapped her daughter then must have murdered her, you know? So anyway, so I'm like sitting there, and I don't remember. So a lot of this, we'll talk about trial, and I'll just use whatever my own knowledge is from the legal system. But so the state is going to present their case, and the way it works is the defense can either do opening statements right after the prosecution does, or they can wait until the prosecution presents their entire case and the prosecution gives like their closing statements, and then the defense can start with their opening statements if that's how they want to play it. Yeah.
They can either ping pong it back and forth, or they can just wait and do
until
it, take turns doing like the whole thing.
Yeah, so yeah, right. They can ping pong, or they can let the state present their entire case and then they present their defense.
So it's like a strategy thing, like whichever strategy you think would be best.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing about cases, court cases, and we'll get into the strategy thing because this is crazy. Okay. So I think whatever, the state gives their opening remarks, and it's pretty standard. Like they're alleging that she killed her daughter to be free of her and to party and whatever, and lied about it and dumped her body, which ended up being like a half mile or quarter mile from her house or something. Anyway,
God, okay.
So that's what they're alleging, I think, is that the mom smothered her, used chloroform, strangled her, dumped her body, lied about it to kind of be free of the responsibility, blah, blah, blah. Death penalty case. One sane person can only assume that the defense is going to get up there and, like, I don't know, refute all of this in their opening statements. But what happens is the defense decides to go right after the prosecution, and the attorney gets up and he says, you know, that the daughter's name is Kaylee Anthony. And he's like, Kaylee Anthony died on July 16th, 2008 by accidental drowning. And Casey Anthony, who was, you know, the tot mom, according to Nancy Grace, the girl's mother, she lived with her parents because she was young. She was like 20 or 21 or something.
Okay.
And single mother, and she died by accidental drowning in the family pool, and her grandfather disposed of the body, and Casey lied due to dysfunction related to sustained sexual abuse by her father her whole life, you know? And it was like the craziest shit I had ever seen. Mm-hmm. Like, it was just wild. And so, like, I don't think that no one could really forget that opening statement. Because the thing about opening statements, too, is you can kind of be like, unicorns have wings, you know? Like, you don't have to present any evidence in opening statements. You're kind of...
You're creating a narrative.
Yeah, you're going to lay out what your case is going to be. You don't have to have actual facts or evidence. You can say any fucking thing you want. And so they said that the daughter accidentally drowned in the pool, and the grandfather forced Casey Anthony to cover it up, and she did, and created this whole fiction world that she was living in, that the nanny stole her, and all of this to cope with the like stress of what had happened from her father that had started when she was 8 years old, and he came in her bedroom and started molesting her. Like, it was just wild.
Okay.
Wild. And talk about deflection. So, and to me, it was crazy. It just kind of blew my mind. I was like, what kind of opening statement is this? Like, what kind of defense is this? Like, this is just nuts.
Do you think they were trying to, I know you're going to get into the strategies, but do you think they were trying to just like lay on the reasonable doubt and that
here's what I think.
Okay.
And I've, and this is from information that I have learned being like what we had talked about previously, being like the victim witness through a criminal court case. Mm-hmm. The defendant runs their own defense. And I think
Okay.
that's like one thing that I just really didn't know a lot about defense attorneys or anything until the last year. And I mean, the only knowledge I had was from like movies and TVs. And I just sort of thought like they were shady assholes who just were defending criminals and trying to get them off any slick way that they could and blah, blah, blah. I don't feel that way anymore. I actually think that it's probably a rather noble profession. And some defense attorneys, they approach defendants in a different way. But the bottom line is that a defendant runs their defense and they make choices. They make their own choices. And I think some criminal defendants are willing to listen to their attorney and understand that their attorney is their legal advocate and that they're the expert and that they're going to work together. But, a lot of clients just take their attorney's advice because they're the experts.
Right. And then you have Ted Bundy and basically this woman here just going to do what they want to do.
Well, they're not the only ones. I mean,
right.
like the guy that I like and the defendant in my criminal case, kind of a nightmare too. And I have, just because I think, he was also he wanted to run his own defense because he could, and he just wasn't happy with the way that his attorney was running it, and so that's the bottom line, is that defendants run their own defense. And some attorneys, I think, will, if they don't feel like their client's defense is in line with how they would run it, then they're not comfortable defending them, and maybe they'll, suggest a recommendation for a different attorney and someone who could maybe run their defense a little bit more what they think is in line with what they want. Other attorneys are like, whatever, dude, it's your life. If you're not going to listen to my advice, even though I'm the expert, and you want to do it this way anyway, then I'll do it that way for you. But it's like, it's on your head, but this is but I'll do it for you, but whatever, it's on you, bro, And so I kind of get the feeling that that's what happened here, is that Casey Anthony, who is a big fat liar, like, just like, she was like, this is what happened,
Right.
And I think her attorney was like, well, if I don't run her defense the way that she wants me to, she's going to fire me and she'll find someone who's going to run her defense the way that she wants them to. So I'll just be her attorney. And I don't think there's really anything wrong with that. He's just really doing what he's paid to do, what his client is telling him to do.
Right.
Okay. So that's what happens, like opening statements at the trial. And I have spent a fair amount of time, like when I was interning at the courthouse in a judge's chamber. I interned with a particular branch and I would spend time in chambers. And that's like the judge's offices basically, and their whole branch goes in their chambers, and it's like their bailiff and their clerk and probably like an assistant and their court reporter. And when they're on breaks from like trials and cases and stuff, they go, I guarantee after opening statements, like the branch went back in chambers and everyone was like, oh my God, can you believe what just happened? Like, including, I guarantee the judge reacted like that too.
It's like, did you know that unicorns have wings? Like, this is crazy.
Can you believe that he said that? Oh my God, he's trying to get the jury to believe that unicorns has wings. I can't, like, what's going to happen next, And then they go out there and they're all so stoic. And then you don't know that that's like really what's happening. Like,
seasoned professionals. Yeah.
They're just like, can you believe this shit? So Casey Anthony, pathological liar. So she is a single mother. She got pregnant when she was 19, and her family dynamics are really, really odd to say the least. And I think just the fact, you can only imagine, like in the opening statements, she's accusing her father of covering up her daughter's accidental death and then molesting her as a child. You can only imagine like the kind of dysfunction that exists in that house without maybe even like the abuse that Casey is talking about. So she gets pregnant when she's 19, and she's a slender girl. She's a skinny girl. I think that's part of the reason why she got a lot of attention, and she's kind of like the hot mom, the young hot mom, you know?
Right. And she's pretty. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think she's pretty, but whatever. People think she's pretty, and like she has a hot body and whatever. And so she's pregnant, and she like doesn't tell her parents, and when she starts showing, they're just in so much denial about it, to the point where they're like at a wedding, and Casey's like 6 months pregnant wearing a sundress, and she looks fucking pregnant, you know?
Can I interject real quick here?
Yeah.
So when I was in high school, I had this boyfriend who went to a different high school than I did. And I went to all of his dances and proms and things. And there was one time where we went to the senior Disneyland trip. So it takes place at night. It's just a bunch of seniors and whoever they're taking with them. And my boyfriend at the time, Aaron, had a best friend named Scott. And Scott's girlfriend was so fucking pregnant that it was just obvious. She had a giant belly. And she just denied that she was pregnant. She just said, no, I'm not pregnant. I've just put on weight. I'm not pregnant. And I remember there's one specific time because we had to dress up to go to Disneyland. So the guys are all wearing suits with jackets. And she was cold because she was in a dress. And he was putting his jacket over her and buttoning it over her belly. And I'm like, are you shitting me? Are you shitting me right now? You're going to lie that people are going to believe this. People believe that you're not pregnant. Your parents and his parents both believe that you're not pregnant.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's denial.
They're crazy.
Denial is crazy. So that's what happened here. So Casey Anthony is at a family wedding. She's in a sundress because they live in Florida, and she's a skinny girl, and she's 6 months pregnant. She has a fucking belly.
Yeah.
And someone like an aunt is like says to her mother, whose name is Cindy Anthony, says to Cindy, your daughter's pregnant. And Cindy is like, no, she's just gained a little weight. Like, I don't want to give her a complex, you know, like she's just gaining a little weight. And they're like, that's not gaining weight. Like, that is a pregnant belly. Like, you think she just gained like 15 pounds in a round circle, like in like a basketball in front of her belly? Are you kidding me? She's like skinny everywhere else, but that she has this round belly. So they finally and she's like Casey's claiming to be a virgin. Okay.
Oh yeah, of course. Mm-hmm.
And she's this huge pregnant. Okay. So and finally it comes out. Okay, I'm pregnant. And then she claims that her boyfriend is the dad, and he's skeptical because of timing, and they do a test.
No.
They do a test, and he's not the father. And then Casey says that the real father died in a car crash, and she just didn't want to talk about it. It's too upsetting, so let's never talk about it again. And her parents like, oh, okay. And then because of her claims of like sexual abuse and shit, during the trial, they did test her father and her brother as like the
potential parents.
Yeah, and they weren't.
Oh,
so,
God.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, thank God they weren't.
Right. So those are like a couple big lies that Casey has. And then, so, you know, the baby's born. She's raising her on her own. She like has a job at Universal Studios. I think gets fired. And then for like 2 or 3 years lies about having this job.
Oh
and
my God. She's like one of those people that like kills their whole family.
Yeah, no, totally. And so she like, you know, like leaves the house and like goes to work every day.
Oh my God, that's crazy. I can't even wrap my brain around people who do that. I know nothing about this case. I'm so excited. Keep talking.
Okay, so her daughter's like 2 years old. They're living with their parents. Casey works at Universal Studios, we think. Everything seems normal. And then kind of like one day Casey sort of disappears, I want to say. I think she stayed in touch with her mom because I think it wasn't super uncommon for her to like I mean, people do say she was a good mother, hands-on. She really did like parent her kid. And
Yeah, in front of other people. That's what sociopaths do. They pull it off in front of other people.
Well, she did have a lot of help, so I think her mom really did help too. And so Casey is like gone for a while, and I think her mom is like trying to, like, hey, it's been a month. I really miss my granddaughter. I want to see her. Come home. Like, what's going on? You've never been gone this long. And I think Casey is sort of like maybe being a brat or somehow like making it seem like, God, you guys are cramping my style. Like, I just need a little break. You're so like overbearing and blah, blah, blah.
So at this point, when the daughter goes missing, Casey's
the parents don't know. The parents,
but she's not living with her parents anymore.
She was up until the day her daughter went missing, and then that's the day that Casey stopped coming home.
Oh, I see.
But initially it started to be, I think, something normal at first. Like I think it wasn't the most uncommon maybe for her to be gone a few nights with Kaylee, or like even a week or something.
Okay.
And then it kept like getting longer and longer and longer. And her mother was getting more and more anxious. Like, where's my granddaughter? You keep saying like, and Casey kept saying like, oh, I'm on a business trip with Universal Studios. I'm on a business trip. And like Kaylee's with the nanny. That's what she kept saying for a month. She's with the nanny. And Zanny the nanny, which people think is a term for like Xanax. Because Casey, who doesn't have this job at Universal Studios, but because she had this job at Universal Studios, she needed childcare, and so she got a nanny named Zanny the nanny. Well, this Zanny the nanny never existed. So people think that that's like she used to give her daughter Xanax.
She would drug her baby when she went to work.
No, Cindy, there was no job. She would.
Oh, okay. I thought she would never
pretend.
Did work
she would pretend she did, but she got fired, but didn't tell anyone.
Okay.
But she would like pretend that she was going to work, and then say her daughter. She was pretending to go to work and saying her daughter was with the nanny. But people think what happened was she was pretending to go to work and giving her daughter Xanax.
Ugh.
Just to knock her out, so she didn't have to like deal with her. Right.
Lovely.
Yeah. So, finally Casey shows up at her parents' house. Her mom is freaking out. Her mom like calls 911 because she's like, where's Kaylee? Where's Kaylee? Finally, Casey is like, the nanny has kidnapped her. And so her mom calls 911 and she's like, my daughter just told me that the nanny has kidnapped my granddaughter. And I think they switch her to like a different emergency line, but they kept it recording in between. But no one obviously, I don't think the Anthonys knew that. And so Cindy is like talking to Casey like, why haven't you told us? Like, what have you been doing? This is insane. And you can hear Casey calm in the background, like, Mom, I've been trying to locate her on my own. Just like total psychopath stuff. Like, I have been trying to locate her on my own. I think I'm getting closer. I have this information. I can't speak about it, like,
whoa, okay.
I can't involve the authorities because it would make it worse, like all this kind of shit.
Well, you know what? I bet there is truth in Zanny the nanny taking the baby. I bet she gave her too much Xanax and the baby died.
Yeah, I mean, that's what a lot of people think. So, okay. So then the cops are involved and they're treating it at this point as a missing child. And so Casey is with her fucking lies, and she takes them to Universal Studios because that's where she works, right? And she goes to like the employee entrance and the security guard is like, I'm sorry, I don't have you as an employee here. And she's like, no, I work here. Call down your supervisor. I'm an employee here. And so he calls on his supervisor who's like, we don't have you listed as being an employee here, but since we're dealing with a missing child and you have some police detectives with you, we're going to let you enter and do what you think you need to do, girl,
Okay. Yeah.
And so she's like goes in and she's like waving at people that she like doesn't know, like pretending like she works there.
Whoa.
She's like
I
leaving.
wonder if her heart rate spiked at all.
I don't think so, because so what happened is like she gets to the end of the hallway and the police detective said she just turned around and looked at him and goes, I don't really work here. I lied about that.
I just wanted to waste some of your time.
And
Surprise!
so they left. And so eventually she's arrested, and I can't remember if she's like arrested before or after they find her daughter's body. Sort of irrelevant, I guess, because they kind of know she's involved in some capacity, obviously. But then eventually, so this is happening like in July of 2008, and I think like by Christmas, October, November, December-ish, like that fall, winter, they find Kaylee's body, and it's like a quarter mile from the house. It's kind of like been dumped in like some swampland or something like that. It's really
That's
close
awful.
to the house, and so
Yeah.
so then like Casey is definitely arrested and charged with murder. And at the prosecution, I think their main theory was that she had drugged her with chloroform, because apparently there was like had been a internet search from the house regarding chloroform. And I actually saw an interview with the judge from the case recently, and he says that he thinks that she gave her chloroform to knock her out and gave her too much, and she died accidentally. And then this is what happened. And I would say the judge, probably knows more about the case than anyone else does. So I say but I think Xanax also is probably a really good option too. I don't know how. I mean, I know.
Well, if not directly in her death, it had it played a part in abuse, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, and I think, I don't know, like, is Casey capable of making chloroform? I don't know. I
don't know anything. I'm pretty good at chemistry, and I know jack shit about making stuff like that.
Oh, I can tell you, because my mom, I'm pretty sure, is a sociopath. She used, whatever. She used to like to kill butterflies and stuff. So my mom told me that the way you make chloroform is it's 1 part nail polish remover, 1 part bleach.
Oh.
That's it.
I know. I've almost made tear gas before with like ammonia and bleach by accident cleaning the bathroom when I was a kid. Yeah.
So anyway, okay. So the day that Kaylee disappears, she's living with her parents. So at 7 a.m., her mom, Cindy, goes to work. And her dad says that at like 1 o'clock, he sees Casey and Kaylee leaving. And supposedly Casey's going to work and Kaylee is going to the nanny. And then at 2:30, Dad goes to work, and Dad is an ex-cop, and I don't know like what work he was doing at that time, but Dad used to be a cop. But what's weird, and I like spent probably so much time researching this, and then I realized I just had to like let it go, because Casey's cell phone like pinged from the that house all day long, and so it doesn't make sense that her dad says he saw her leave, because her cell phone pings her from those towers until like 4 o'clock that afternoon.
Well, she might have just driven down the street a little bit, waited for him to leave, because she's been doing this for a while.
But
she knows how to navigate around.
She would have had to wait till like 1:30 or something like. I mean, an hour and a half for him to leave. It just seems like a long time.
Well, she gave the baby some Xanax. Right. She's reading a book on her phone. She's not far.
Right. Yeah. So okay. So Dad leaves, but that's the thing. So they leave the house at 1, and then Casey's phone starts pinging somewhere else, like around 4:15, and so they think that she must have died between 1 o'clock and 3:15.
Okay.
And so. Presently to this day, Mom believes the defense story minus the dad molestation part, but she believes that Kaylee accidentally drowned and that Casey freaked out and tried to cover it up, and Dad thinks that Casey actually killed her. So her parents are split on what she has done, but we know that
I side with Dad.
We know Mom's in major denial. I mean, that must have been so hard for Dad to hear that opening statement from the defense. Oh
my God, it must have destroyed him.
Can you imagine? Well, and he loved his granddaughter. So I think to say that he had a part in covering up her death is pretty atrocious. And it's
being a cop. being a cop too, at some point he must have realized that something was off with his kid, because you've been trained to a certain extent to deal, with different types of criminal minds. And
well, he knew, I guess, like they had stopped communicating that month. That it is a little suspicious, their behavior towards each other, like that month.
Right.
They stopped communicating completely. And I guess like he went to go meet her for lunch. Okay, here's another crazy whatever. Like during that 30-day period that Kaylee was missing, at some point, George Anthony, Casey's dad, goes to meet her for lunch at her job at Sports Authority that she doesn't even work at. So like he goes to Sports Authority to meet her for lunch, and they're like, I'm sorry, we don't have anyone like that works here. And then Casey like is out there waiting for in the parking lot with him, and he's like, they just told me you don't work here. And she's like, oh yeah, I don't work here anymore.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, so then what ends up happening is, and why it was such a big deal is, so the prosecution, they did charge her, it was murder in the first, and they were seeking the death penalty. And then I think they also, it was like maybe a murder in the second, and then like an aggravated manslaughter or something like that. And she was found not guilty of all of those things. All of those. Like they had charged her, I think, with 6 crimes. 3 were felonies, and they were related to the death of her daughter. And 3 were misdemeanors, and they were related to, like, lying to the police or impeding an investigation. Okay. And she was found guilty of those, but she was found not guilty of anything that ever had to do with her daughter. And so
Are you serious?
And so she was it was,
I know
and
nothing
then
about this.
She was sentenced as time served, and so she was like immediately released from jail right after her trial.
Oh man, it pays to be pretty, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, she doesn't have a life anymore. I guess, she's really hated a lot, and I think she probably has to fear for her safety for the rest of her life. But in her mind, like, she still, I think, doesn't, whatever lie she has concocted in her head or however her view of reality is, it doesn't paint. There was an interview that came out with her recently, and she said that she has no problem sleeping at night.
Oh, I'm sure she doesn't. She doesn't really feel that she's done anything wrong.
So here's what was surprising about the jury. I mean, this case was interesting because it really shows that you never know what a jury is going to do. But it also kind of shows a little bit about, like, prosecution strategy. So it seems sort of like what had happened was charges are interesting, and especially murder charges. I think you really have to show for like murder in the first premeditation and all sorts of stuff. And a lot of it was circumstantial, I think, in this case. And it was a heavy, heavy charge. I don't know if anyone would expect it to happen. So here's my understanding is that they charge her with murder in the first, seeking death penalty because that's the jury that they want. They want, because every member on that jury is going to be open to the death penalty. Otherwise, they're not going to make it on the jury.
They're excused. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they get that kind of jury. And they're for sure going to nail her on at least the aggravated manslaughter charge. That's what they're thinking. There's no way a death penalty jury is going to let her get away with anything less than aggravated manslaughter, but they did. So that's what's interesting about like the legal system too. Prosecution can overcharge so that they can ensure that the lesser charge is going to stick for sure. But in this case, it didn't happen.
No, it didn't work.
No.
Wow.
Yeah, so that bitch be crazy.
That bitch be crazy. Wow, that really, I honestly didn't know that she'd gotten off. Nothing. I just kind of didn't follow the case at all.
Yeah, and what's a little unfortunate is that, she had created this nanny, this fictional nanny, like almost after her daughter was born. So, it's not like this happened after her daughter had died. This nanny was in place for a while. And her name was, they called her Zanny the nanny, but
no one had ever met Zanny the nanny?
No one had ever met Zanny the nanny, but her full name was given as Zenaida Gonzalez. Zenaida Gonzalez. And what is really interesting is it kind of shows, it's kind of like the one part where Casey screwed up, right? Like she should have called her nanny Susan Smith, because there's something like 9 Zenaida Gonzalez's in the United States.
In Florida or in the United States.
Yeah, and there's like one in there's ironically, there's one in Orlando, Florida. And so she got called in on all of this, and she never fucking met Casey Anthony.
Well, they would also be able to look at bank statements. Like, she has to get paid somehow. If there's not any kind of
her lie the lie part fell apart quick on that, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, you're paying the nanny. If the nanny isn't getting paid somehow, if there isn't deposits made into her bank or, some sort of cash exchange, but there's no linking them.
Right. And so Casey probably said she was paying her in cash or something.
She probably found a name in the phone book.
Right.
That went with what she had concocted.
Right.
Oh, I can just go ahead and,
Zanny the nanny. Look, this is perfect. We'll just call her this lady.
And there's so many Latino people with last name Gonzalez. I've got this.
Right.
I've got this. No one's gonna be able to trace this person. There's gonna be a million of them.
Right.
It's no. There's 9 in the U.S.
Right. Because Zenaida is not a usual name.
It's a very unusual name. Yeah. It's a nice name. I like it. But
should have been Maria Gonzalez.
Oh, that would have been much better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That bitch super be crazy.
Yeah. She's super be crazy for sure.
She's super be crazy. Oh, that was good. That was a good one. I enjoyed that.
Thank you.
In the worst way possible. Oh.
Well, this has been Demiworld.
Yep, and I'm Cindy.
And I'm Kelly.
And thanks for listening. This is going to be our last episode for this season, and we will be coming to you soon with a trailer that will introduce the next season, which I'm not sure what the topic's going to be yet.
Nope, and we might have a couple other maybe smaller episodes from this season to clarify anything or answer
there'll be
questions.
A smattering in between. Yeah, any questions that might get posed to us, and there's been a few so far. So,
but thank you for making it through our first season with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. We do appreciate it, and we're going to be back with more awesome stuff. This has been Demiworld. You can follow us on Facebook at Demiworld Podcast and Twitter at DemiworldCast. You can write us at demiworldpodcast@gmail.com. You can find the cast anywhere podcasts live or at our website, demiworld.net. And remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for listening.